Since the Amazing Digital Circus is mostly animated, I was caught off guard when the real-life scenes explicitly called out my hometown of St. Louis, Missouri. When I left the cinema, one of the first things that I did was visit the bus stop from the after-credits scene. That bus stop had evidence that it had been visited by other fans. It wasn't only the bus stop. All of the real-life segments took place in and around St. Louis, Missouri. Since most people watching will likely never visit St. Louis, I feel a responsibility to share some context and shine a light on these locations. In this video, I'm going to go shot by shot and review the locations. I'll share some context, and where appropriate, I'll share my footage. The locations are ordered by their appearance, starting with the flashbacks from episode 7 and ending with the post-credits scene featuring the bus stop. While many of these locations are public spaces, at least 3 are private residences. Private residences may have given their explicit consent to participate in filming, but what they did not consent to is people showing up and demanding access to their private space. By sharing the addresses, I could unwittingly contribute to some of this inappropriate antisocial behavior. While I will not be sharing exact addresses, I will be discussing general geographic areas and their cultural context. Gooseworks, the creator of the Amazing Digital Circus, has stated that the real-world locations are not part of the story and are purely visuals. The real-life locations are not part of a scavenger hunt, they're not part of an augmented reality game. Don't go to these private residences, and most importantly, don't go to these private residences and harass anyone. One of these locations is a small business that is excited to welcome Amazing Digital Circus fans. They're celebrating its inclusion. Don't you want to hear about that? So anyways, let's get into it. We begin in Eureka, Missouri. Eureka is a suburb located in St. Louis County. St. Louis County and St. Louis City County are 2 different places. It's a whole thing, but they split in 1876. If St. Louis City is here, then Eureka is here. In the finale, Jax recounted a memory where they had shared something vulnerable with their mother. From the tone of the story, it can be inferred that Jax came out with information regarding their gender identity or their sexuality. The script seems to be intentionally vague, as Jax didn't want to disclose that information. In response, Jax's mother denigrated them, and Jax responded by physically pushing their mother away. This memory is accompanied by some of the flashback footage first featured in episode 7. There's footage of someone running in a neighborhood and then driving on a country road. After episode 7 launched, it didn't take long for a GeoGuessr to pinpoint the spot of the running clip to a neighborhood in Eureka, Missouri. I do not want to encourage people to visit this location, and using my own footage would be counter to this perspective. We can tell that this is a suburban neighborhood, and there are a few other things that I can tell you without blowing up its spot or revealing any of the secret sauce of this neighborhood. First of all, Eureka is about 24 miles as the crow flies from downtown St. Louis. This neighborhood, like many of the neighborhoods at this distance from downtown, are relatively new constructions. This particular neighborhood is composed mostly of houses that were constructed between the aughts and now. The builder is a mass construction builder who usually builds entire neighborhoods at a time. There's a couple of different builders operating in the St. Louis area that operate in a similar cadence. Another builder of this type that we have a lot of constructions, a lot of neighborhoods built by is McBride. Entire McBride neighborhoods are built at one time. I will say, and this is a generalization, that the sort of people who choose to live 20 miles out from a densely populated area are usually not the sort of people who want random strangers poking around their lives. It's also entirely likely that the owners of this house were not aware that it was going to be featured in this show. For that reason, I recommend skipping this location. Don't come in cosplay, don't visit. There are so many generic suburbs around St. Louis. Like I said, there are McBride constructions, they're easy to look up, and they're pretty indiscernible from this neighborhood. Go to those instead. Leave these people alone. If you are going to a weird random neighborhood to get shots of yourself in cosplay, be aware of your surroundings, don't loiter, and if you get the impression that you're making people uncomfortable, then you should probably leave. Next up is the flashback of Jax, or someone else, driving up a densely wooded road at night. Despite all odds, geoguessers were also able to pinpoint this location. It helps that it's also in Eureka, not too far from the first location. This location is a public road located behind what is currently known as Six Flags St. Louis. The theme park has changed owners and will be known as Mid-America by Enchanted Parks when the 2026 season concludes. I drove this stretch of road to get this footage. This is a windy, hilly road without a sidewalk. There are hiking paths and equestrian trails in the area, but they do not go alongside the road. I won't tell you to not visit this location. I will tell you that it's unsafe to walk along this road. Driving this road may be uncomfortable for you if you're unfamiliar or not well practiced with driving winding, hilly roads. It is safest to drive slowly on this road, and the speed limit is 30 miles per hour, but locals may expect traffic to move faster. For all of those reasons, I recommend skipping this location and substituting it with a park. While we're still in Eureka, let's take a look at the culture and sentiments of people in Eureka and compare it to what we know of Jax's backstory. As of the 2020 census, Eureka had a population of 11,646. A city of this size typically doesn't have an outsized impact on local culture. When I think of Eureka, I think of Six Flags. But that's not the only cultural note or understanding that we have of Eureka. Let's look at Jax's specific story and consider how that may go down in a place like Eureka. Like I mentioned, there's only 11,646 people in Eureka, so it's kind of hard to get a grasp on public sentiment. The best proxy I could find for understanding community sentiment around LGBTQ plus topics would be how the community reacted to a school board controversy. In 2022, a Rockwood school board member gave a 5-minute speech at a town hall hosted by a conservative radio station. Eureka High School is part of the Rockwood School District. During the speech, the school board member commented on the mentally challenged, physically other-abled, critical race theory, LGBTQA topics, and at one point in particular calling out transgender crap. The school board member resigned in 2024, 2 years after making the statements, and 1 year before their term was set to expire. I think it's worth pointing out, to Eureka's defense, that it was controversial that a school board member made these statements in a setting like a town hall. It was newsworthy. It made headlines. People were very upset about it. Now, there wasn't enough of a backlash for this person to be removed from the school board, but they did leave a year early. You know, there's no winner when this sort of thing happens, but I do think it indicates that there is both a culture and a counterculture in Eureka, and unfortunately, it can be a little bit of a roll of a dice when you are a young person trying to come out to your parents. This isn't entirely surprising, as Eureka spans both St. Louis County and Jefferson County. Jefferson County leans Republican. I've heard it said that 1 in 5 transgender teens become homeless when they come out. The Trevor Project released a report in 2021 on homelessness and housing instability among LGBTQ youth that shared this insight. Over a quarter of respondents, 28%, reported that they were currently homeless or had experienced homelessness or housing instability in the past. 219 respondents reported that they were currently homeless. Of those who were currently homeless, 41% reported that they were living in a shelter, car, campground, or other transitional or temporary housing at the time of the survey. This could inform our understanding of the next location. In the first flashback, Jax is running through a neighborhood. In the second memory, it appears as though Jax is driving through a densely wooded area. This road is north of Eureka, behind Six Flags. This area leads to hiking trails and campsites, which possibly could lead us to this third location. During the finale, there is an additional flashback where it appears as though Jax is sitting and has a hand on a comforter or sleeping bag in front of a concrete wall. This could be a basement. This also could be a concrete wall and an outdoor shelter. It is so vague and unspecific that while I'm sure there will be a significant effort to locate this shooting spot, it's not for me to cover. That being said, I wouldn't be surprised to discover that this is also in Eureka, as the previous 2 locations are. Since we don't know where this location is, I can't really make a recommendation one way or another. This wraps up our segment on Eureka. Now we head to St. Louis City for the shots from the finale. Alright, maybe I spoke a little too soon. In the finale, Kane presents a slideshow of the cast's real lives. He starts with Pomni. We get to see some of her Instagram posts, starting with a picture of her holding a camera in a dense wooded area. I don't have any extra special insight on this photo. It could have been taken in Eureka. It also could have been taken in Forest Park or Tower Grove Park. All we have to go from is this tree. I have a confession. When this segment of the finale started and the Instagram posts had their location set as St. Louis, Missouri, my immediate response was denial. When the finale ended, I turned to my friends and I told them how amazed I was that each different geo had received different versions of the film cut to reflect the nearest city. I was in denial that this global phenomenon, the Amazing Digital Circus, would have anything to do with St. Louis. I thought that each version of the film shown in every area of the world had been cut and edited to reflect a nearby city. I wasn't the only person to think this. I've found some evidence on Reddit of other people drawing the same conclusion. It's so rare and shocking that something like the Amazing Digital Circus would have anything to do with St. Louis. So while I was watching the finale, I had these 2 different things going on in my head. One, denial that is actually taking place in St. Louis. And then the reality that I was looking at, which was the scenes in front of me appear to be distinctly St. Louis. The next 2 locations confused me because they are distinctly St. Louis. As soon as I saw this, I had a clear mental image of the building. When I showed this to my husband, he had a similar reaction. This is a St. Louis City 1920s red brick 4-flat. I feel like I can tell you so many things about this building from this photo, but at the same time, nothing at all. Let's start with the obvious tell. The 3-panel stained glass window. The side windows are tall rectangles and the center window is a square. Unfortunately, the frame has gotten the landlord's special. That is to say, the wood on both the window frame and the baseboard have been drenched in white paint. However, these stained glass windows look like they could be original. Also, they look like they have working hinges. This window setting sits in the parlor, the front room, in a small apartment building. That's what I mean when I say 4-flat. This is likely a building with 4 apartments. The building is symmetrical with 2 apartments on each floor. While this type of construction is ubiquitous in the city of St. Louis, the 3-panel stained glass window is less common. More common is 2 separate stained glass windows in the parlor, one at either end of the room. If there's a fireplace, the windows flank the fireplace. If not the 2 separate stained glasses, there is another common setting with a double stained glass window. Since watching the finale, I've sought buildings that fit this mold. I wanted to verify that 4-flats have window settings that fit this configuration. They do. I've found 4-flats with this triple stained glass window setting in North City, South City, and in between the 2. That only leaves the entirety of the city of St. Louis. Do you know the joke about the 2 fish? The one says to the other, "The water's nice today," and the other says, "What's water?" Mid-size apartments are frequently the water in urban environments. That includes St. Louis. I do think that the location of this specific residence will come to light. It could be by GeoGuessr. There are a few challenges to finding these windows on Google Maps. These windows are on the side of the building, and these buildings are built close to one another. Then Google Maps films from the street. It's common for there to be trees between the street and the house. These trees could obscure the windows. And that's not even mentioning the challenge of identifying the subject of the stained glass from Google Maps, which is why I think it's likely that this building will be identified by its inside. Maybe it will be spotted when it's listed for rent on a website. A visitor to a party at this apartment could see the stained glass and have an aha moment. While I don't know the builders who preferred this window configuration, I know that it was likely not A.A. Fisher. A couple of years ago, I came across this picture book at the library of all of my least favorite residential constructions in St. Louis. If these buildings were faces, they look to me like their eyes would be very far apart. Between 1894 and 1929, A.A. Fisher built more than 300 buildings in St. Louis, including apartment buildings. The cityscape of St. Louis was designed by builders like Fisher, who built clusters of constructions throughout the city. Once you start to recognize a builder's vocabulary, you start to see them everywhere. From what I can tell, none of his buildings feature this stained glass configuration. There's also a chance that this isn't a 4-flat. This could be some layout or design of a single-family residence that I'm not familiar with. That's even assuming that this is in St. Louis. Various Midwest cities shared architectural shorthand. At the same time that St. Louis grew rapidly, so did Chicago, Milwaukee, Minneapolis. I saw plenty of stained glass in Milwaukee when I visited. Also, the owner can remove the stained glass at any point. Some people prefer to be able to see through windows, and old windows can be a nuisance to maintain. For those considering hunting for this location, I urge you to reconsider. Finding and outing this building isn't going to fix your life. It's likely it will cause a lot of issues for a few people. After I watched the finale, I started seeing buildings like this all over town. Because I saw them, I could better understand their architectural type. But it also convinced me further that this should not be a scavenger hunt. This isn't a public landmark, it's someone's home. While this building could give us some information about Pomni, the address won't. Enough about identifying a building that I don't want to identify. What does this building tell us about Pomni or Abigail Brooks? I'm just going to operate under the assumption that this is a 1920s red brick 4-flat. The only reason why I'm so familiar with this type of construction is because myself and so many people I've known have lived in this type of apartment. Depending on the neighborhood, in 2026, this type of apartment could have a monthly rent around $1,300. That would be for a 2-bed, 1-bathroom. From this photo, we could tell that the flooring and the window frame look like they're in really good shape, so I would say it's probably closer to that $1,300 number. Because of the price point and the fact that these are usually in clusters in dense walkable areas, they're very popular with students and young professionals. The story that I get from this photo is that it's either Pomni or a friend's apartment. This is a typical mid-20s Halloween party where it's either a pregame to walk to a bar or to hang out at the apartment for the rest of the night. Since sometimes these apartments are clusters, it's not uncommon for a party to start at one place and then end up at another. This is the second very St. Louis image. It's an abandoned school. But, like the stained glass, this represents so much more. It's not just any abandoned school. It's a William B. Ittner school. The story of St. Louis architecture is often a story about red brick. This material is dominant across the metropolitan area. Clay was often mined and fired in the neighborhood where it was used. In the 1800s, there were more than 53 clay mines across the city. By 1900, St. Louis was known as one of the world's great brick-making centers. The Jefferson County Courthouse in Port Townsend, Washington, was built in 1892. This Victorian red brick construction was built with 4 million bricks from St. Louis, Missouri. In the 1800s, a wave of German immigrants came to St. Louis. Among them was A.A. Fisher's father. Many immigrants, including Germans, worked in the physically demanding brick industry. Some of the most impressive testaments to brick in St. Louis are the campuses of the 2 breweries. The derelict Lemp Brewery was built over caves, and the whole family is worth a deep dive, especially if you're into ghosts. The Anheuser-Busch Brewery across the highway from Lemp is still running today. While these constructions are beautiful and domineering, they represent industry. The schools like this one were meant to uplift the students and community. This school was designed by William B. Ittner. Ittner grew up in St. Louis, and his father owned a brick factory. He attended St. Louis City Public Schools and eventually Washington University's Manual Training School. Washington University is in St. Louis. The Manual Training School was open from 1879 through 1917. After getting a degree in architecture at Cornell University, Ittner returned to his hometown. This timeline means Ittner would have been 12 and living in St. Louis during the 1877 general strike. A.A. Fisher would have been 10 or 11 and also living in St. Louis. Fisher's father immigrated to St. Louis from Germany in the 1850s during a time of political upheaval. He would have been working as a brewer during the 1877 strike. In 1878, the Fisher family moved to Arkansas. I could talk for an hour about the 1877 railroad strike, particularly about what happened here in St. Louis. The Working Man's Party overtook the city's public institutions only for the bourgeoisie to take the power back. Some historians claim the Veiled Prophets founding in 1878 as the city elite's response to that upheaval. While I can't find any record of these two architects' relationships to this historical event, it likely impacted the direction of their lives and their architecture. Anyways, back to Ittner. In 1897, Ittner became the commissioner of school buildings at the St. Louis Board of Education. Over the course of his career, he designed 50 schools in St. Louis. He also designed schools throughout the country. He's credited with having built more than 430 schools in 25 states. Here's a map of the Ittner schools in St. Louis. This graphic and much of the information in this section comes from a rich blog post on NextSTL about Ittner. You should read it for more information. In addition to schools, Ittner also was the architect for several high-rises in St. Louis. For instance, the Continental Life building in downtown. This building has a surprising link to the 1984 Ghostbusters film. While Dana's apartment building is at 55 Central Park West, movie magic altered the top of the building. Matte paintings and models rendered the setting to mimic the top of Ittner's Continental Life building. That's always confusing to explain to people. The top of the building is in the Ghostbusters, but it isn't, but it's supposed to be. That's such a nice story. Local man does good, reaches national acclaim. So how do we get from that to this? Have you ever heard about urban renewal? The idea is that old, dense neighborhoods are a problem that can be solved. While the St. Louis 1947 Comprehensive City Plan did not single-handedly empty the schools, it did reimagine the landscape of the city. Large swaths of urban neighborhoods were cleared and drained of population. Then came urban renewal, highway construction, suburbanization, white flight, population loss, and decades of disinvestment. Neighborhood schools depend on neighborhoods. When those neighborhoods were cleared, cut apart, or drained of people, many of the schools lost the communities they were built to serve. That brings us to the Carr School. This school is the Carr School in downtown St. Louis. Built in 1908, it closed in 1983. I visited this location during the afternoon on a weekend. There's another abandoned school across the street. There's also a park adjacent to this lot. When I visited, there were people enjoying the park. That's notable because people often discuss abandoned buildings like they're ruins. They're not. This site is part of a neighborhood that people live in. Because this is in a less active part of downtown St. Louis, if you are to visit, I have some precautions that I would recommend. Many people would tell you not to come here, but if I'd said that, I'd be a hypocrite. Because I went. I think it's fine to view the building from the outside, but you should follow the same guidance that you would in any unfamiliar area. If you do visit, do it in daylight. Don't trespass, don't enter the building. Not only can abandoned buildings be unstable, but they can also be places where people are sheltering. Respect people's space and don't film strangers. Be normal about it. After Pomni's section, we get a small glimpse of Ragatha's life. It appears as though she's a realtor. In addition to some information about her equestrian hobbies, we also get a shot of a residence. Not only is this a private residence, it's also not in Missouri. I will not be distributing the details. The next real-life location in this montage would be Gangle's workplace from her Twitter feed. I have no idea where this is. The building outside the window is not an A.A. Fisher construction. That's all I got. In Zubel's section, we get another real-life location that's safe to talk about. The Triangle Bar is a bar that Zubel opened and operates. Later, it's revealed that Jax frequents the Triangle Bar. Since the photos of the Triangle Bar were dark and a little vague, I thought that there was no chance that we were going to find out where the real Triangle Bar is. But here's the thing, small businesses like publicity. That's why Purple Quarters is proud to own this association. Purple Quarters is a bar in the Grove. The Grove is known as a gayborhood in St. Louis. The idea that the Triangle Bar would be a place that facilitates community would be right on the nose. Purple Quarters hosts weekly events and has a very nice atmosphere. There's pinball, pool, Jenga, and skee ball in the premises. It's a cute bar and a cozy space. I stopped by after work before dusk, which is why my footage may be a bit brighter than the shots from the finale. The pictures from Jax's section take place near the games inside and on the back patio. The Grove is an area rich with nightlife and culture. The Triangle Bar would fit right in. There's great food and places for dancing within walking distance. I had a very tasty mocktail when I visited. This is a place that wants you to visit, so please visit. Kinger's section, once again, takes place at a private home. I'm at a loss for not only pinpointing the location, but for also getting a frame of reference or context on this house. We see a brick fireplace and some light stained wooden kitchen cabinets. Initially, I thought that this could be a suburban home, something like a McBride development, but the more time that goes by, the less confident I feel in this assessment. I would expect the fireplace room to be larger in a newer suburban development. The whole point of living in a suburb is that you get more space and a larger scale house. The same applies to this kitchen. It looks like the fridge and the microwave are on the same wall, and the sink is kind of tucked away in the corner. Suburban kitchens tend to be larger with their appliances spread out along a larger triangle. I have no idea where this is or what it says about Kinger and Kinger's family. The kitchen appliances appear to be recent, which means that this is either a recent build or a recently outfitted kitchen. We're supposed to think of Kinger as a company man, someone with a career, so that makes sense. Jax's section opens with a shot that's likely within an apartment. Wouldn't it be something if I went on another 5-minute rant just based off of this doorknob and the wainscoting? It really would, but I don't have anything. This could be anywhere. I've got nothing. Then the next shot is of Jax delivering a package. I don't have a lot for this shot of Jax delivering a package, but I do have something. We see here 3 levels along a grade change. On the first level is the street and sidewalk. Then Jax and the lady are on a higher level, separated from the street by a staircase. A railing between the bottom of the frame and the woman indicate a higher level where the house sits. This doesn't tell us anything about the neighborhood, but it could be in South City. South City has residential blocks with several levels between a home and the street. North St. Louis has elevation changes too, but it generally reads flatter. There are exceptions in both the North and the South. Once again, this is a situation where it's so vague and generic that locating this exact spot wouldn't have a net benefit. This is a vague location, and you could find proxies all over the city. Finally, we arrive at the end of the line, the post-credit bus stop scene. In this scene, the cast approaches the bus stop, waits for a bus, the bus arrives, they board, and then it departs. This is a functioning bus stop in a park. This is Heman Park, which is in a neighborhood known as University City. The bus route is 91, and it starts at the Delmar Loop Transit Center, and it ends at the Chesterfield City Hall. Since this is an active bus stop, we should discuss the etiquette of filming at public transit locations. In my experience of public transit, I don't really care what other people are doing as long as they are quiet and they leave me alone. Not all bus stops in St. Louis have covered seating. This one does, and you ought to be mindful of crowding the space. St. Louis can have both extremes of heat in the summer and cold in the winter. Inclement weather like rain, hail, sleet, and snow are also common in their respective seasons. If people are using this space to stay dry while waiting for a bus, you should leave them alone. On weekdays, the bus should come every 40 minutes, and on the weekend, it's about once an hour. However, the St. Louis bus system isn't known for being punctual. Now for the million-dollar question. Should you visit this bus stop? I feel like the answer is pretty obvious. It's a public amenity in a public park. I felt very safe during my visit. That being said, there is some baggage to unpack here. This site is north of Delmar Boulevard. In my experience, some St. Louisans hold on to this as a boundary. It is useful context that while this is north of Delmar, it is west of Forest Park. If you're visiting St. Louis and you tell your hosts or locals that you're going to visit this location, they may have some reservations. It's possible that they're well-meaning but don't have any personal experience with this area. What they're thinking about and what they may be operating with a precaution for is what's known colloquially as the Delmar Divide. In the 1930s, a technique known as redlining defined areas where minorities were less likely to secure financing for homes. In many segments of St. Louis redlining, Delmar Boulevard was at or near the dividing line. That was nearly 100 years ago. Despite the passage of time, the area north of Delmar Boulevard remains a mainly black area. Even after redlining was appealed, the legacy is still alive today. In St. Louis City, north of Delmar has a higher crime rate than the south. This division also remains an active indicator of the racial segregation of the city. In this map, we see the household income relative to the Delmar Divide. This brings us to something that's probably the elephant in the room for those of you watching who only know one thing about St. Louis. St. Louis is supposedly very dangerous. In 2019, St. Louis was named number 19 on a list of the most dangerous cities in the world. In 2026, it was ranked the third most dangerous place in the US by US News. Do you remember earlier in this video when I discussed the fact that St. Louis City is outside of St. Louis County? Most metropolitan areas do not split their city from the city's suburbs. In 2024, Sam Dobson at the University of Missouri St. Louis redefined the city boundaries to see the impact on the crime rate. When you merge the city and county, its ranking substantially changes. More dangerous cities include Los Angeles, California, Phoenix, Arizona, Oklahoma City, Oklahoma. Here's a list of cities in Texas alone with a higher crime rate than the consolidated St. Louis City and County metropolitan area: Corpus Christi, Dallas, Houston, and San Antonio. While I was at this bus stop, I saw a woman walking a dog in the park. I saw a guy running for exercise. If people tell you this area is dangerous, I would recommend responding by asking them about their own personal experience. They're likely unfamiliar with this neighborhood. Sometimes people draw on their assumptions based on a region instead of personal experience. This isn't even in St. Louis City, it's in St. Louis County. University City has some pretty upscale areas. In general, this region is culturally rich. Just down the street is Cube Tea Studio, which is my favorite bubble tea place in St. Louis. In the same shopping center is Kate Zone, which is my favorite Szechuan cuisine restaurant in St. Louis. And even further down the street is Asian Kitchen Korean Cuisine, which is probably my second favorite Asian restaurant in the area. I think that you should absolutely visit this bus stop if you're in the St. Louis region and you're interested. Give space and respect the commuters. Mind your own behavior and surroundings. But this is literally a public space. Another thing in the bus stop scene is that on the back of the bus stop, you can see the numbers 314. I've seen some people commenting, asking about what this represents. Could it be a little teaser code? And once again, Gooseworks has made it clear that the real life locations are not part of like a puzzle game or an augmented reality game. This is simply graffiti that was likely already at the stop when they were shooting. 314 is the area code for phone numbers in St. Louis. The 314 is so commonplace that it becomes kind of like a shorthand for St. Louis. You could refer to St. Louis as the 314. And on March 14th, which is also known as Pi Day 3.14, there are celebrations and activities and events held throughout the city to celebrate St. Louis. Well, those are all of the locations from the finale. I hope that you enjoyed my little tour, this deep dive. If this is your first time seeing content from my channel, hi, what's up? I mostly make videos about digital culture and browser-based virtual pet games like Neopet, Sliden, Flight Rising, so feel free to check some of those out. My most recent video was about how Meta has patented using dead people's accounts to train LLMs. I hope you enjoyed this video, and I'll see you around. All right. Bye!